Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and this is Uganda Democratic Federation, and today it's my greatest pleasure to have once again Attorney Mubiru Musoke, who is going to talk about Museveni's corruption of Uganda. We are all very aware of the corruption that has been taking place in Uganda for about 35 years now, and the patronage system that is in place. Every institution in Uganda has a lot of corruption, and today we are going to hear from Attorney Mubiru Musoke of Uganda Democratic Federation. Over to you, Mr. Mubiru.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'll begin with a quotation. Corruption in Uganda is like a rain. It comes from the heavens to drop to the ground. Indicators abound as to the source. Corruption in high place has assumed such proportions that it now amounts to brazen daylight aggravated robbery. It has godfathers with the establishment. No good governance can succeed in such a situation. It is the worst source of abuse of human rights and power, unquote. That quotation is from Daniel Mulika, the former Katikiro of Uganda. It is in a paper he wrote about 10 years ago entitled Draft Concept Paper on Convocation of a National Convention for Consensual Governance in Uganda. Mulika's statement quoted above is not an exaggeration. It inspired my presentation, the conversation today. There is sufficient evidence to back up Mulika's sad evaluation of the impact of corruption on politics and democracy in Uganda. In this brief conversation and critique of Museveni's corruption in Uganda, we have a few objectives. First, Mulika's comparison of corruption to rain is intended to emphasize the quantum and or common nature of corruption in every aspect of life in Uganda. In Uganda, especially along the shores of Lake Victoria, it rains almost every day during the so-called wet season. However, corruption in Uganda does not come from the heavens to drop to the ground, as Mulika dramatically puts it. The causes of corruption in Uganda can be scientifically and historically explained. Moral decay in Uganda, Ugandan society is one of the causes of corruption in Uganda, as we will illustrate using examples, contemporary examples of corruption. Another cause of corruption is NRM politics and its regime culture. Much of the corruption in Uganda can be traced to its institutionalization by NRM regime culture. To the extent corruption in Uganda is institutionalized within the NRM regime culture, it can be validly said to have godfathers with with the establishment. And as a result, corruption in high place has assumed such proportions that it now amounts to brazen daylight aggravated robbery, as Molika says. The institutionalization of corruption in Uganda has rendered good governance impossible. And as a result, it is the worst source of abuse of human rights and power. Some of Molika's claims can, in fact, be documented. And this conversation is partly intended to do that. There are four aspects from which we want to look at corruption under NRM. First, we briefly probe the general or universal explanation of the causes of corruption. Then we shall trace the specific causes of corruption within the NRM regime culture. This approach is necessary because no prescription can be effective to cure a disease without knowledge of the nature and cause of the disease itself in trying to treat it. While the gravity of corruption in Uganda is not in doubt, its causation and therefore prescriptions for a cure are often misunderstood, controversial, and therefore need clarification and fresh explanation if we are to make any headway in dealing with this notorious subject. The third, we shall analyze and look at specific corruption scandals under the NRM regime, which the NRM cannot deny, and that they actually happened or took place. What does the existence of these corruption scandals mean or tell us about the NRM regime itself? Fourth, we shall assess the inevitable consequences of corruption on politics, on society, on the economy, and inevitably democracy in a democratizing political system like Uganda. Lastly, after explaining its causes, its nature and effects, or the effect of corruption on Ugandan society, we shall suggest the only effective solutions to the problem of corruption in Uganda. Our suggestion to the solution of corruption anywhere in the world is deduced from the effective operation and management of existing political systems that have put corruption under control without necessarily abolishing it, which we believe is a sociological impossibility because the causes of corruption are deeply rooted in human nature. The more corrupt a political system is, the less democratic it tends to be. And the more democratic a political system becomes, the less corrupt it becomes. Clearly, the picture of corruption that comes from our study of the NRM regime in Uganda is complex and sometimes confusing and discouraging. However, like any complex subject, the more knowledge about corruption we accumulate, the closer we get to explain its nature, its causes, its impact on society in general, and ultimately enhance our ability to prevent and or to control corruption. The subject of corruption is both notorious in the sense that it is disapproved by almost everyone in society, and yet it is depressing in the sense that it has serious negative consequences on the majority of the people in society, and corruption is always an injustice because it unfairly enriches a few corrupt people in society, as is the case in Uganda today. Corruption is always a violation of the rule of law, and therefore we have to fight it with all the means we have. There is a mistaken view which associates corruption with economic underdevelopment, poverty, and a simple absence of democracy. The fact is that corruption occurs in all political systems, including democratic ones, with democratic, developed, and rich economies. The roots of corruption can ultimately be traced to human nature and the politics. That is why a prime minister like Silvio Berlusconi of Italy was indicted and prosecuted for corruption even while in office. A former mayor of Paris and cabinet minister in France was charged with corruption. A former US vice president, John N. Mitchell, who served as Nixon's attorney general before he became vice president, was convicted and sent to jail for bribery in Virginia, a state where he had been governor. A US senator from Alaska was convicted for corruption in 2009, and a US representative in the House of Representatives in the US from Mississippi was indicted for corruption in the same year. Former Speaker of the House of Representatives in Massachusetts was convicted on corruption charges and sent to federal prison in 2011. Former governor of Illinois was convicted on corruption charges in 2011 and sentenced to 14 years in a federal prison for trying to sell a seat vacated by President Obama in Illinois. And a former police chief of New York was convicted of corruption and sentenced to a 4-year term in prison. Many ministers in Great Britain and prime ministers in Japan were forced to resign in disgrace because of scandals arising from corruption. We mention this just to illustrate the fact that only democracy can cure or deal with effectively with the democracy. It's not that democratic countries are not corrupt. The corruption is there. I've just given you the examples. But when you commit corruption in a democratic country, you are almost certain to be punished for what you've done. But imagine in Uganda, Kaihura was, of course, fired, but has he been punished? And so many others, the ministers in Museveni's government, they are corrupt. And we know they are thieves, but have they been punished? No, that's the difference between a democratic system and a non-democratic system. One of the general causes of corruption in Uganda at this particular time is moral decay in the whole of Ugandan society. Recent studies of the nature of enforcement of social norms by Mark D. Hauser show that morality in society should be treated as the equivalent of a biological organ which evolved over millennia to protect and enforce a stable social order. Our first task in trying to understand and in the general causes of corruption is to give a brief description of the nature and the function of social norms in a sociologically healthy society. Social norms are unique and indispensable components of society. They are created within the society itself. They are not imported. Norms are never imported. Like say the rules against incest in Uganda or Buganda for that matter. They were not copied from Saudi Arabia or United Kingdom. They were developed as norms from our culture. And so you can see that it is important for society to fight corruption. First of all, it has to deal with its social norms. In Uganda and many African countries during the period when anarchy took over, that is, when government institutions either collapsed, broke down, became too weak to function formally, or were seriously damaged by political rivalry between political groups. Automatic enforcement of social norms was the first casualty, whose breakdown exposed the society to vulnerability of those who ruthlessly wielded power and imposed their will on others without a scintilla of legitimacy. Leaders acted like terrorists in Somalia, in Uganda, even in Kenya. Morality and terrorism are incompatible, however. During this period I'm talking about in Africa, of turmoil, anarchy, and turbulence, in which a British philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, comparatively characterized life during the Civil War in England as nasty, short, and brutish. Social norms that protect social order and ethical conduct lost efficacy, not only in England at that time, but also in Uganda. And the brutal regimes we have endured. Looking at corruption became the norm rather than the exception. Phrases like bichupuli and selling air, respectively, were invented to describe pervasive corrupt practices going on everywhere in society, in Ugandan society for that matter. These words gained currency and acceptance in society, as if selling air or cashing a kichipuri, which amounted to outright theft, as Mulika said, aggravated robbery, went on as if it was an honorable and legitimate profession. Language and the invention of new words is a good indicator of what is going on in society at a particular period in history. The period of turbulence was a period in Uganda in which each man or woman was literally for himself or herself. It was aggravated by the collapse of the economy, fueled by galloping inflation, intensified by excruciating poverty. As social norms lost efficacy, the normal emotions of anger, rage, and disgust that accompanied the violation of social norms almost disappeared, leading to a situation whereby the violators of the social norms received praise instead of moral condemnation for their corrupt and unethical conduct. These negative social changes were so pervasive that no element of social class was unaffected, immune, or insulated from the vices of corruption and unethical conduct, as I will illustrate soon. The ordinary people and those in upper classes were equally affected and even involved or participated in corrupt activities, either as a necessity and a means of marginal survival in a harsh economy, or cruel exploitation of the vulnerable by the unscrupulous. All professions, ranging from priesthood to prostitution, were affected. That is, the judiciary was corrupted, professors were corrupted, engineers, medical doctors, accountants, aviation pilots, civil servants, especially police and teachers, were all affected by corrupting social process directly caused by moral decay in Ugandan society. It was a national tragedy whose dreadful consequences we are now experiencing and from which we are reaping deadly rewards. Moral decay in Uganda, the Ugandan society, was extensive and thorough. It affected the entire society. Let us look at a few dramatic examples. Defilement of infants, children, and young girls. In September, for example, 2017, a 37-year-old father was arrested and charged with defiling his 11-year-old daughter. The wife and mother narrated that upon returning from a night vigil, she found the husband at home drunk and naked. The girl told the mother that she was defiled when the mother was at the vigil. The police saved the suspect from a mob that attempted to lynch him. Another defilement case is even more bizarre. In June 2019, An 80-year-old man, David Apollo, from Kotlak village in the district of Bukedia, was stoned to death for allegedly defiling a 2-year-old girl while the parents were busy in the fields weeding millet and maize. When they returned, they found the girl profusely bleeding from her private parts. When the mother asked what happened to her, she pointed to Apollo. Apollo had been arrested several times on defilement charges. He had previously defiled a 12-year-old girl. On June 8, 2019, a 4-year-old girl went missing. She was kidnapped on June 8, 2019 at Sambwe Orthodox Primary School, where her mother, Sylvia Isavirie, had gone to attend a village circle meeting. The girl was recovered on June 11 after a pupil at the Subway Orthodox Primary School had gone to the latrine and heard the girl screaming for help at the bottom of the latrine. After the horrible crime of defiling the 4-year-old child, the criminal dumped the girl, who was still alive, into a pit latrine. Miraculously, however, after surviving for 3 days in the pit latrine, the girl was taken to Bombo Military Hospital in Ruel Triangle. She was put under intensive medical care. Medical examination indicated that there was penetration of her private parts and rape. Now, I'm giving these examples to show you that Uganda today is suffering severely from moral decay. And these incidents are going on because our moral norms have decayed. They are no longer effective. And I can cite you so many of these cases which I have done research to compile, and you will be surprised. It's not only defiling children that is done, that is going on in Uganda, but also in other areas like in universities. Students cheat in exams. The rate at which this cheating is going on in Uganda is incredible. At Makerere University and all the other universities, even in the national exams of O level and A level, there is cheating. The question is, what is going on? Because of moral decay, because of the norms that used to help society replenish itself are no longer there. And it is amazing. Even Makerere University, my university, which I love so much, the students in the law school cheat still, and they are given credits which they don't deserve until they are caught and then prohibited from graduating. Right now, today, why are these things going on? Because of moral decay. There's a small sample of examples I've given, especially defilement of infants and young girls above, is sad social index of moral decay in Uganda. The statistics from the police department tell a very sad story, getting worse every day. In 2007, police reported 12,230 cases of defilement of young girls. The number of since then has jumped to 14,985 in 2017. These figures, in fact, seem to be very low because not all defilement cases are reported. So, notwithstanding that fact, the defilement was ranked the third overall crime committed in Uganda. It is amazing. The other crimes, the police is so corrupt, by the way, that it can hardly investigate, as I will narrate later on. There is also what I call pathological brutality. Pathological brutality is when somebody commits an act which is way beyond what is normal. For example, splashing acid on somebody's face. And there is a case I've just been working on in which a woman, a girlfriend, poured boiling oil on the face of her boyfriend. The boyfriend happens to be a doctor, a medical doctor, who suffered this. And in fact, after 2 months, he died. His eyes were destroyed. Maybe with that, what kind of society do we have here? And when you put a person like Museveni in a situation like that, he behaves like a hyenas. For him, it is good. It is a bonanza, and as I will illustrate later on. So pouring acid rain on the face of people, or boiling oil is such a brutal situation, but it's going on today. These things I'm talking about are taking place today. Why? The reason is because we have moral decay, and the moral decay begins at the head, as they say. The fish rots from the head. Because of Museveni, who is the head of the so-called leader of the nation, everybody looks at what he does. And this is not exception for only Uganda. Even here in America, the Ku Klux Klan celebrated Donald Trump's election. And the police are killing Black people simply because Trump is in power. So you can see there is a connection between the leader and what goes on in society. This is, we should not deceive ourselves that this only happens in underdeveloped countries. No, it happens everywhere. The only difference between a democratic country and our country like Uganda is that the democracy enforces the principles, the principles of separation of powers. The separation of powers is important in order for the executive exercise of executive authority has to be controlled, has to be limited, has to be supervised, and it can only be supervised by the legislature. What we have in Uganda is a legislature, 457 members. The latest time I checked, 457. members of parliament, and all of them, the majority of them are NRM. Now, they cannot technically exercise that responsibility of democracy of checking the executive power because of the way this the norms are broken down. But more importantly, we have a parliament which has no teeth. So you can't have democracy unless the parliament can effectively and adversely limit the powers of the executive. You can't have a democracy corrupt. That's why you can't even control corruption, because the IGG, the Inspector General of Government, submits 2 reports every year in July and December. These reports are full of abuse of power, of corruption, of stealing government money. But Parliament, which is supposed to read these reports and implement them and enforce them, does not do so. They are just sitting and drinking beer and whatever they drink. Sometimes probably they are even smoking marijuana. You can't have democracy operate under those circumstances. The principle of separation of power is out of reach in Uganda. That's why Museveni does whatever he wants. And the people look around and they say, and in fact, they follow him like a small, hyenas following their mother, their leader, so that they can share whenever there is a catch. They will take a little bit of a crumb from the leader of the pack. And this is what is going on in Uganda. And it is very unfortunate. Dishonesty, deception, and cheating are going on in Uganda. False academic papers. I was almost crying when I read what is going on at Makerere. Even the law school, 18 students there were cheating in exams, and they had to be disqualified to not to qualify to graduate. The same is going on even in the medical school. The same is going on, this kind of cheating. So in other words, when you look at Uganda, the society is not different from the politics, the political structure. They are the same. And therefore, one has to do a lot of work to make sure that these principles put back to in operation. I will give you the example. In the State House, there is a woman called Lieutenant Colonel Edith Nakalema. She is the head of the so-called corruption unit in the president's office. I've looked under the laws and the constitution everywhere. I have not found a legitimate legal foundation for her office in the president's office. Now, this is what we have. And I am amazed that now, this woman, Lieutenant Lieutenant Colonel Edith Nakalema, she recently went on a so-called fact-finding tour to West Nile. And supposedly there was a headmaster who was, misusing funds. And guess what? She came to the conclusion that there was no problem, that the man who was being accused of stealing 200 million shillings was exonerated by Lieutenant Colonel Edith Nakalema. First of all, her office does not exist under the laws of Uganda. But there she is in the president's office. And recently, there was another scandal in the Bank of Uganda. They went for printing money in Britain, and they had about 25 crates. The money was on 25 crates. Guess what? There were a few other 5 crates which were not recorded. And what happened? When they arrived at Entebbe, they only delivered 25 crates, and somehow the 5 crates disappeared. And the Bank of Uganda Governor Museveni wrote a letter to Nakalema, this Lieutenant Colonel Nakalema, to investigate. And what did she do? She just compounded. She just these 5 crates were never found, and yet her office is incompatible with that of the IGG. The IGG can create sub-branches in every district, but not in the president's office. However, this Nakalema, who is occupying an office, an anti-corrupt unit in the president's office, is in charge of so many things, of theft of a lot of money from the Bank of Uganda. And nobody knows even her job. There is no job description. So now you talk about corruption, and you have a situation like this, which is a violation of the Constitution. There is no rule of law because everything depends on what Museveni wants or what he does. For example, why did he create this office, Nakalema's office, the so-called State House Corruption Unit within the State House? It doesn't belong there. If the IGG is there, the IGG submits is an institution, which a legitimate institution. She submits reports to the parliament twice in July and December, and the parliament, of course, being what they are just drinking beer and whiskey and wine and all that. They don't even read these reports. This is what you have in Uganda. It is terrible that it is going on, and it will not stop. I mentioned especially the case of Lieutenant Colonel Edith Nakalema. It is the best example of corruption in Uganda. Her office does not exist anywhere under the law. And yet she supposedly is overseeing corruption in Uganda. And we have IGG, the Inspector General of Government, who is a constitutional office under the Constitution, Article 227. The IGG is an independent office, and he cannot be dismissed. But Nakalema is the opposite. He's in the armpits of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. I don't know what she does. I don't even really believe that she investigates anything except to bamboozle, except to get involved in stealing resources of Uganda, like these 30 crates of cash which were shipped from London, and they only delivered 25 at Entebbe. And Nakadeva is in charge of this. Oh my goodness. See, it's just unbelievable. You cannot bring back democracy or in Uganda if you have institutions like those which are corrupt. Because of the violation of the principle of separation of powers in Uganda. As I told you, the principle does not apply in Uganda because 457 MPs, the majority of them are NRM. So nothing can, in fact, let me back up a little bit about this, the abuse of power in Uganda. When Museveni proposed the amendment of the constitution in 2005 to remove term limits, the parliament was given, each member of parliament was given I think it was $5,000, and they went and they removed the term limit, of course, and term limit was supposed to ensure orderly and peaceful transfer of power. Museveni is still there. He not only there, he now has amended the constitution to remove age limit. And all this is done in the parliament. The parliament, which is not performing its duty of supervising and checking the abuse of power by the executive. On the other hand, our parliament is just helping Museveni to abuse his authority because they cannot vote against him. They cannot vote anything that he doesn't favor. So what we have is I don't even have a word to describe it. It is leadership that is based on corrupt principles. I'm not going to go into the details of the scandals like the Global Fund and the others. Those are for the next conversation. Today, my emphasis has been to illustrate not only that corruption occurs everywhere, but the only way you can control it is through democracy. But democracy has principles, and these principles, separation of powers, is the one fundamental one. Remember when the House brought charges of impeachment against Trump, it wasn't out of spite or out of ignorance or what, but that's what they are supposed to do. Okay, it's okay. They didn't have the votes in the Senate to convict him, but they did their job. Their job was to bring those facts out. We can't have that in Uganda because Museveni is parliament. Museveni dominates the Ugandan parliament. You can't do anything in parliament without NRM voting for that particular whatever bill or motion, whatever it is, it has to be supported by the not only NRM but by Museveni. And this is where our problem arises of fighting corruption. We can't fight it because of these principles, like the rule of law, separation of powers. Separation of powers means the legislative power supervises the executive power on one hand. And on the other hand, it means that an independent judiciary arbitrates between the other branches and determines which one is in conformity with the law and which one is not. In Uganda, you can't even have that because the judiciary itself is corrupt. And in the next conversation, I'm going to give you the examples of land titles. Land titles are meaningless in Uganda today because of corruption. You may, well, you may have a title, a piece of paper, which says so and so has sold it such and such land. But when you go deep down in the land office, those titles don't exist. They are not valid. And that will be my discussion next week anyway, next conversation. And I want to thank you for tuning in on this very, very important, the topic of Museveni's corruption of Uganda. Museveni has corrupted Uganda by the word corruption here is a verb, meaning what Museveni has done has created corruption in Uganda, and it is very difficult to fight corruption in Uganda. Where do you begin in fighting corruption in Uganda? The only way I see you can effectively fight corruption in Uganda is to remove the NRM regime. And next time, anyway, I will elaborate on how this can be done. The regime culture created by Museveni in corrupting the entire system, as the example of Nakayem I just given you, Lieutenant Colonel Nakayem, being in charge of corruption in the president's office, when there is IGG, and she only appears when there is cash, when the Bank of Uganda is bringing cash from London. Then you hear about Nakayem performing the job. Obviously, we know what she's doing. I wonder whether all the rest of Ugandans know what she's doing. But anyway, next time I will look at the same subject of corruption from a different perspective, and more particularly from the regime culture of NRM in Uganda. Thank you for listening, and until we meet again and discuss our third very miserable subject of corruption, stay well and take care of yourself. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mubiru Musoke, for that very informative presentation of corruption in Uganda. It's very, very unfortunate what is going on. It's really saddens. It's a tragedy to see that the society is doing what the political leaders are doing. The moral decay as a result of what is going on at the top in the government, the institutionalized corruption. There is no democracy. There is no separation of power. There is no rule of law. Museveni is the parliament. Museveni is also the Bank of Uganda, by the way. And you correctly pointed out that the only solution is regime change. Thank you very much. I would like to thank our listeners who have been on Facebook. Thank you so much. We shall be recording another presentation as Mr. Muliru Musoke, the attorney, has promised, and that will be streamed live next week. So wherever you are, be careful, take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. Thank you again, Mr. Muliru Musoke.